All right, guys, I think it's about time. One last reminder before we start. We have a survey here for MDOP. So if anyone is interested in filling that out and you haven't got it yet, just raise your hand. We have Kevin and Aaron who can hand that off to you. We appreciate it. All right. And it's about time. Let's get started. My name is Paul McKnight. I have Lance Crandall here with me. We're both program managers at MDOP, and today we're going to be talking about the Microsoft Bitlocker Administration and Management, also known as MBAM. We do have a lot of content to cover, so what I would like to ask you guys is if you have a question and you can wait until the end, then we're going to try to address all the questions. If you have something that you really want to ask and you cannot wait, raise your hand, or if you could step up to the mic so we can actually, we're recording the session and then everybody can hear your question. But otherwise, we'll have some time at the end, hopefully, to address your questions. All right, so we're going to talk about improvements for Windows 8. That's basically the bulk of the session. We're going to talk about how MBAM deals with the new BitLocker for Windows 8. We're going to look at the main investment features areas that we have for MBAM 2.0. Lance is going to show some cool demos, look about deploying MBAM, if you're starting a new deployment, if you're upgrading from MBAM 1.0. And then we're also going to show you some end-user experience demos as well. So how many of you, just a quick show of hands, how many of you have worked with MBAM 1.0 or know what's about? All right, so we have a good number of people. So as you probably know, the goal for MBAM 1.0 was really to simplify the deployment and the utilization of Bitlocker. Bitlocker doesn't really provide you with anything out of the box to enforce policies or to make sure you're tracking who's encrypted or not. So MBAM basically added the enforcement piece, the reporting piece, and we also added some additional features around provisioning. And overall, of course, the goal was to reduce costs. So you don't have to create your own, in-house solution to track who's encrypted or not, how to enforce policy, and all of that. Looking at MBAM 2.0, we continue with the same themes. We wanted to improve the compliance and security. So we looked at some of the points where MBAM 1.0 was not completely reaching our goals around policies and how we allowed some flexibility on the end user side and, keeping the IT admin in control of what's being enforced or not. We also want to do some additional work integrating with SCCM. And once we go through the demo, you guys are going to see we have a new installation mode that we call System Center Integrated that will allow you to leverage your CM deployment, especially for reports. And then overall, we continue to try to work with you guys, try to understand what is the work of the IT admin in this area, try to understand where most of the costs were hitting you. So we have new features like the self-service portal, which allows you to decrease the number of help desk calls. And we have some other improvements that overall will continue the trend that we believe that MBAM allows you to really reduce costs when you're talking about deploying BitLocker. All right, so the way we split this, we basically have 4 main investment areas. The first one is the configuration manager integration. And that's basically, we're leveraging some of the things that, first of all, IT admins were already doing that with MBAM 1.0. For instance, creating collections and pushing the MBAM agent to those collections. We're facilitating some of that work, so we create a collection out of the box for you, and it has some criteria that the MBAM agent will require. We also integrated some of the features that we were doing ourselves. Like if you remember for MBAM 1.0, we had the hardware compatibility part of the product. Now we're leveraging CM, because CM already has the hardware inventory, and it can pretty much track that information there. So we're not really trying to reinvent the wheel, so we're leveraging what CM already provides to you. And then finally, getting some of the unified experience for CM. You have the reports. A lot of IT admins will already look at deployment reports and compliance reports using CM. So we also allow you to hook up the MBAM compliance reports into the CM console. Oops. The second investment theme here is Windows 8. So of course we wanted to support Windows 8 every time. It's pretty usual for MDOP. Every time we have a new version, we support the new OS that's releasing alongside with it. For us, it's not really just supporting Windows 8. We're also adding some cool new features, like we're supporting Windows To Go. We're also supporting the Bitlocker pre-provisioning. So if you're pre-provisioning your image with Bitlocker, we'll hook up into that process and work just fine. And along with the Windows To Go support, I mean, we did what Bitlocker did. We follow the same model. We support non-TPM machines. So up until MBAM 1.0, you had to have a TPM to leverage MBAM. Now, if you have machines that don't have TPM, we allow you to set the password protector for those machines as well. Third theme there, and I mentioned that briefly before, we created the self-service portal. And this is really an extension of what we had before with the admin portal. So it basically allows you to do the same thing that the help desk admin was able to do before, but now you don't need to have that person in the middle. You have end users going to your portal, and you set up the security. You define who can access that or not. But end users are able to go there. If they are in a lockdown state, they need to recover their BitLocker key. So they enter their key, recover their recovery key right there, type that in, so they don't need to call anyone, and they should be able to just log into their machine again. Really, it's really fast and really easy. We're going to show you that in one of our demos. And then the third one is basically just customer feedback. We heard a lot of feedback from you guys. Some of the things that we thought we were doing that were, we thought we were providing, some value there. You guys came back to us and said, look, I know you're doing this, but it's really making our deployment more difficult. Classic example is the TD check. We were checking for TD. We thought that was the right thing to do. Now we're not. You can still use it, but you have to set that up outside of the product. And by doing that, we also added things like you're able to use SQL Standard. You don't need to use SQL Enterprise. There's some really important scalability and performance improvements we made. Once we get to the slide where we show like the recommended configuration for machines and for servers, you'll see that it's a simpler story, and you're actually able to use, you need less hardware to deploy 2.0, and overall, it's much easier than what we had before. All right, so we do get that question all the time, when does it ship? And we're still saying April. I know you guys want more details, but just stay tuned. We're really close, so we'll talk about that one later, but for now, we're still saying April. I know people don't like that answer, but what is that? Oh, yes, this year, this April. 20 days. Yeah, the next 20 days. Okay, so looking at the architecture, the standalone mode, so like I mentioned to you guys, we added this configuration manager mode, but we still allow you to deploy. If you don't have configuration manager, of course you can still deploy MBAM. We call that the standalone mode, and this is what this architecture slide is supposed to show you here. So basically we have the big components. You have your client computer, you have your web services. We really don't have, if you stop to think about it, there isn't really a MBAM server. We install server components, and it's basically SQL Server and IIS. So we install some tables in SQL Server. We create some web services there. We have the reports in SQL Server. And then basically we have GPOs deploying the policy for you. So it's the MBAM agent running on your client computer, getting policy through GPOs, talking to web services that talk to, either the self-service portal or the help desk admin portal, and you report data. You report data back to the database, and that data is exposed through SSRS for our reports. So it's a super simple topology. It's really as all MDOT products, we don't try we don't require any big investment on, infrastructure. It's really just leveraging whatever you guys have there, unless you don't have a SQL deployment, which is really unlikely. And then, looking at the configuration manager version, we pretty much replace the compliance side with the configuration manager database. We also add the way we push that data up to configuration manager is that we deploy a baseline to your configuration manager agent. So we still have the MBAM agent running and answering the keys to the recovery database, but now we also have your configuration manager sending the compliance data up through that baseline to the configuration manager server. And it's pretty simple. It's one baseline that you deploy, and then you have the set of reports. And Lance is going to show that to you guys. It's super simple, but it leverages whatever CM deployment you have in there. And we also create the collection and some other components there once we install in that mode.
And that can add a lot to your scalability story if you integrate it with Configuration Manager, because the compliance data is what's kind of a constant process. Every 90 minutes is kicking up that compliance data. So doing that through Config Manager allows you to scale with Config Manager.
Exactly. So even though we scale better on the standalone, if you leverage CM, your CM deployment is probably already, capable of scaling pretty well, and that just adds to that. You really don't need to do anything beyond that. All right. So talking about supported software, we added a few new versions. So I mentioned we are supporting Windows 8 as one of the client OSs. We're also supporting Windows Server 2012, and we support the standard Enterprise and Data Center edition. We still support Windows Server 2008. We're listing Windows 8, Windows to Go. It's really the same SKU there. One interesting thing to notice is that even though Bitlocker supports Windows 8 Professional, we only support Windows 8 Enterprise. And if you have MDOP, you already have Windows 8 Enterprise, so it shouldn't be a big deal anyway. On the SQL side, we support 2008 R2 and 2012. And then on the CM side, we support CM7 and 2012 as well. So it's pretty broad there. We're not skipping anything as far as the 4 pieces that we require. All right, so we talked about some of the investments we made, and we talked about the configurations that we had for 1.0 and really got simplified now. So for 1.0, and we have the next slide actually has more details, but if you remember the documentation for 1.0, we had like from 1 box to 5 box configurations, and we would say, well, you can spread out the components and it will scale this way for that many users. For 2.0, it's really a much simpler story. We have our own IT department in Microsoft deploying MBAM using 2 boxes. And they're up to, I think they're almost close to 300,000 clients talking to those boxes now. And next slide, I'm going to show you guys the actual details on those machines. But overall, it's not a very heavy load for servers here. We talked about the TD not being a requirement anymore. It's still there if you want to enable it manually. A lot of people, care about that, so mentioning again to make sure you remember that. And then the VSS writer, we did completely revamp our VSS writer. So if you're worried about backups and how MVAM integrates with that, we're using a VSS writer that plugs in right into the SQL Server VSS writer, so it should be super easy to use. All right, we got some overlap there on the top, but basically what we're showing here is we have 3 options. The first one is a 1-box configuration, and we really just recommend that for lab testing. If you were verifying our beta builds, or if you just want to deploy really quickly and check it out, it will work, but still it's not something that we recommend for production. For production, we have basically the 2-server box if you're running standalone, and then we have the 3-server configuration if you're running CM. And that's really, we don't even list the requirements for the CM box because that's your CM deployment. We don't require anything beyond what you're already running there. We just have here the numbers for the SQL Server and for the web server. And you can see really it's super light. Shouldn't be a problem at all. All right. So talking about deployment, that's probably where we get more questions. Mentioned to you guys that we still have the standalone if you're not using CM, or even if you are using CM, but for whatever reason you're not interested in integrating the reports. So you have that mode, and you have the CM mode. You still have, I think I briefly mentioned that before, the important thing here to notice is that the keys being escrowed, the actual secure key for Bitlocker, is not saved in CM. It's saved in our own database. Some people are concerned about that because they don't want that kind of security information being saved in CM. So if you're using CM mode, the only thing that you're uploading there is the compliance data. So it's not really anything that's a security concern. You're always going to have that key escrow to our own database. The audit remains also on the SQL database. So if anyone tries to reset his own key, or if a help desk person tries to recover the key for a user, still going to have that information saved on our own SQL Server database. So it's also not a security concern for the CM mode. And then the only thing really that you get on the CM mode is you need to make sure to deploy the CM components before you have everything working, because you're basically expanding the software inventory collection that is sent up. So you need to install expand the baseline and distribute that to your agents before you have that compliance data being reported up. Okay, so we have our first demo.
All right. All right, so Paul gave us a lot of great information about some of the deployment configurations, some of the enhancements that we've made to scalability, different topologies that we have. We have the standalone topology, as Paul mentioned, and the CM integrated topology. As Paul mentioned, we only recommend installing all of the components on one machine if you're doing it in a lab environment. But for the sake of this demo and for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to install it on the same machine as well. There's a couple of decisions that you need to make as you're getting ready to deploy MBAM 2.0. And those decisions are along the lines of, do I want to integrate with Config Manager or not? That's kind of the bottom line there. So we'll walk through kind of both scenarios. I'll show you where kind of the fork in the road is during the installation. And we can kind of see some of the differences and things that happen. We'll also kind of walk through what it looks like after it's already installed, how you can go through the configuration, what recovery looks like, and those sorts of scenarios. So let's get started. As we mentioned, there's a couple of things of requirements that you have to have to actually install MBAM. First of all, we require IIS. It has web components for the web portals and web services. And then we also have the SQL components. The reason why we don't recommend having installing all the components on one server is just because a lot of it's just security. You don't really want to have your IIS boxes on the same box as SQL. So that's one of the reasons why we split it out. For smaller deployments, you totally could do that, but your security guys might get mad at you. So let's get started. So we're going to do a standalone installation first here. So we just run the MBAM setup. Wow, it got really dark. Hopefully.
And the performance will not be great because we're also running on the virtual machine, right?
Yeah. Wait for it. Yeah, sorry, the hard drive I'm running off of is really slow, so the performance isn't going to be great. All right, so the first screen here is pretty obvious. We'd love for you to join the Customer Improvement Program, obviously, to give us some more information on how you use MBAM. But for this, we're not going to do that. So we're going to start the installation, accept the license agreement. As Paul mentioned earlier, MDOP, if you're not aware, is part of something that you can get with your EA. So just make sure that you are fully licensed for that before you install this. And here's the fork in the road. So if you're doing a standalone installation, then select the first one. If you're doing System Center Integrated, select the second one. And I'll show you what the System Center Integrated one looks like in a minute, but we're going to walk through the standalone one first. All right, so here is where you can actually select what features you want to install on this machine. There's a lot of different things here, and I'll walk through kind of what each one is. So the recovery database is where your clients will actually escrow the recovery keys once they're encrypted with Bitlocker. So even if you already have Bitlocker installed on a machine and you don't have MBAM in your environment yet but want to get there, once you install the MBAM agent, we're actually going to escrow that key for you into the MBAM database. So that's kind of the benefit of this. You don't have to do it just during imaging time. You can definitely push out MBAM after the fact, even if you already have Bitlocker installed. It does. We don't remove that. Yeah.
So let's just repeat the question. So the question was, if you're escrowing the key to BitLock to MBAM, will it still escrow that key to AD? And the answer is, if you have that policy set, we won't even know about it. So you could do that, but MBAM really will ignore that. You can save that key to AD and to MBAM at the same time.
Right, and once you get MBAM in your environment, it doesn't really make sense to escrow it to AD. And the reason for that is that AD doesn't like reset the keys ever. So if you recover the key, or if someone actually accesses that in Active Directory, then it's the same key. Someone just wrote down that 48-digit key and just kind of left it there. With MBAM, when you recover a key, we actually identify that and know that that happened, and we'll actually reset the key on the machine. So it's kind of a single-use recovery key. So you're always kind of in a more secure state than you are if you just use Active Directory. And we'll also audit that, so you know who actually accessed that recovery key for the individual. So that gives you that auditing that Active Directory doesn't either. You definitely could. That's not something that we provide, but you could definitely write a script that does that. It's just an attribute in AD. So.
Yeah, so let me just, overall, if the keys are being saved to AD, we don't know about it, we don't clean it up, we don't synchronize keys, we really don't do anything with those keys. So you could keep those two databases at the same time if you wanted to, but our recommendation, of course, is just use MBAM to escrow the keys, and we'll take care of the whole lifecycle management for you.
Yeah, and it does provide a lot more benefits, like we mentioned. The compliance and audit database, so in a standalone mode, this is where the MBAM agent, every 90 minutes or however often you set that, that time frame, is going to wake up, check your compliance status, make sure that you're fully encrypted and meeting your company's standards, and we'll send that information up so that you can view it in the reports. You also have the compliance and audit reports, which are the actual reports that you can view to see your compliance status for machines and for your enterprise. And we'll show those a little bit later. Self-service server, this is the new self-service portal that's in MBAM 2.0, and this is where an end user can actually go to a portal that's hosted and enter their recovery key or their recovery ID and get their recovery key back. So they don't have to call the help desk on that, and it's definitely a cost savings. The admin and monitoring server, this contains some web services that we use to actually talk to the recovery database and the compliance database, and it also hosts the help desk feature, which is where your help desk can go to actually do the recovery. And then policy templates, these are just some ADMX templates that we provide that allow you to actually get MBAM set up and running on all of your machines. So it'll just be the settings for that. So as I mentioned, you can split all these out on different servers if you like. You could have each of the databases on 2 different SQL servers if you wanted. You split out all the web components. All these can be separate. But for the sake of this demo, we're going to keep it simple, and we are going to install it all on one machine. So as far as the prereq checking, we're validating you're on the right version of server, that you have .NET installed, that you have IIS installed, the proper components for that. So all of those things are happening in the background, and this may take a minute.
So one important thing Lance just mentioned, and it goes along with the slide I just showed before we started the demo. We say that the minimum configuration is 2 box or 3 box in CM mode, but you could spread it out as much as you want. You could have the ADMX templates in 1 box, 1 service on another box, 1 website in 1 box. So it's really up to you. We're just saying the minimum requirement is that table that we showed. Do we have a question there?
So we would actually recommend splitting out the web services web services and sites on 1 server and SQL on another box. So all the SQL databases would be, and SSRS would be on 1 box. The question was, does the application run on the web server? The help desk portal does, yeah. And then it has the web services as well. And so when your clients are actually talking to the web server, then or the web services to escrow the keys or report their compliance, it hits that particular box. Okay, we passed prereqs. That's a good sign. So on this screen, you can choose whether or not you want to encrypt your network communication. So you can provision a certificate from your CA and use that here, or you can not encrypt it. So essentially, this is encrypting communication between your client and the web services. So if you want to encrypt from the web services to SQL, then that's something you'll have to manually set up, and we have some documentation about how to do that. Correct. So you want to encrypt it. We'd recommend encrypting it. For the sake of this demo, I just didn't because I didn't want to spin up a CA. But the bottom line is definitely we'd recommend being as secure as possible. Those are kind of the keys to your kingdom, so definitely doing it over SSL makes a lot of sense. So for the this one is where we actually just specify what the recovery database is. So you run this on your SQL server, and it picks up the instance, and you can specify if you want to move locations or what the database name is. You don't need to change it. You can keep it all as is. One keynote on this one before it switches. If you're upgrading from MBAM 1.0 to 2.0, the recommended process for doing that is that you will just uninstall the 1.0 components from those servers, and then you just run the installation for 2.0. And what will happen is if it won't uninstall the databases at all. So all of your existing keys and compliance data, all that is safe. So we'll just uninstall everything else but your databases. And then when you're doing the new installation, we'll actually detect that those databases exist. So you want to make sure that the names are the same for your databases, and then we will actually just upgrade those. So that will make them so that they'll work with 2.0. So your data is safe during an upgrade. All right, so same thing for the compliance and audit database. Just keep everything the same. Here's where we're actually going to configure the account that will interact with reporting services. Make sure I spelled it right. And of course I typed it wrong. Did I spell that wrong too? Admin. It's too small on my screen. All right. Good catch, guys. It's a team effort when we're doing demos. All right, the self-service portal, you can put that on a different port. You can put that over SSL as well, however you want to do it. And, this is the virtual directory name that'll be created under. You can change that to something else if you like, something that makes sense for your organization. And here's kind of a key piece that Paul mentioned earlier. So one of the comments that we got from MBAM 1.0 is that the person running this installation even had to have almost domain admin rights to be able to create the SPNs in your environment. And so it kind of was preventing installs, and you'd have to go talk to your AD team and get someone to come run this. It's kind of challenging. So what we've done is we've made this a checkbox. So if you did have those rights in your environment, then you can keep it checked, and we'll actually create the appropriate SPNs for you. But if you don't have those rights, you need to get someone else in your environment to do that for you, then you can just uncheck this, continue with the actual installation, and then we have some steps in our documentation that will show exactly which SPNs need to be created to make this work. So that's kind of a nice feature here that's an addition or a change from the 1.0 install. So hopefully that can make your installations a lot easier. All right, and this is the admin and monitoring server, kind of the same step. So it's kind of grayed this stuff out because we've already kind of said we want to do the SPNs, and we already chose the same path, so we're not going to install them to different paths. So. All right, choose whether or not you want to use Microsoft Update, and we're ready. So I'm not going to walk through wait for the installation on this. I'm going to use the magic of snapshots and jump ahead so we can kind of walk through what happens once it's installed. So we'll give this just a minute to come up. Okay, so now we've got the MBAM standalone environment installed. So as you saw, we installed the self-service portal on this machine. We have the help desk portal. So the first thing you'd want to do essentially is you'd want to go set up how you want your groups to be. So there's some local groups that we create that are specific to MBAM. So you can see these down here. They're all prefaced with MBAM. So you have like advanced help desk user, reporting users, help desk, etc. So there's all sorts of different folks that you can put here. So you could put your advanced help desk users in this group via an AD group, or however you'd like to set this up. But that's the first step. So I've already set it up, and I'm a system admin, so I pretty much have rights to do everything at this point. But you can definitely limit permissions however you'd like for your help desk. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the help desk portal and kind of walk through what that looks like. This might take a minute to wake up since I switched to a snapshot.
So that's basically the site where, your help desk personnel will be able to reset keys for any of your users. We also have the TPM key we haven't talked too much about, right?
Yeah.
Which is also another factor. If MBAM owns the TPM, it's able to recover that TPM key for you. Look at our documentation. We have some interesting details on how we work with Windows 8, since now Windows 8 tries to own the TPM as well. So there's some decisions you need to make there. But that's also one of the 4 options you'll see there at the help desk portal.
Perfect. Yep, under Manage TPM. So we're looking at the help desk portal now. And what I've done here is I populated this with just some fake data. We have a test tool internally that just kind of helps us to inject data so we don't have to spin up a lab of like 1,000 machines to kind of test this thing. But realize that the data that you're looking at isn't accurate. So if you're trying to like do comparisons between policies and why is this saying it's compliant and not, it's not going to make any sense. But it's more just to show you guys what it looks like at this point. So the first report that you can look at for your environment after you have this set up is the Enterprise Compliance Report. And this report just kind of gives you some graphs to show you how many of your machines are compliant, which ones aren't compliant, and it lists out the machines. The computer compliance report here will allow you to just enter a particular computer name. So let's say that your CEO is on a plane and he left his laptop. So he calls in and reports that, and you want to see if you need to actually report this through your legal channels or compliance channels externally or publicly or not. So we want to see if his machine's done. So you would essentially go to the computer compliance report, and we'll drill down to that in a minute, enter his device ID, and we can report on the last time his machine checked in and if it was compliant or not. So you can see here we've got a graph that kind of shows the compliance status across my organization here. You can see we've got about 26% that aren't compliant at this point. So what you could do at that point is, get your security team to send the nasty grams to those users to make sure that you can get them compliant. Here you can see kind of just some overall, this is more just a dashboard. You can see the overall compliance of your organization, et cetera. Again, don't look at the data because it's just kind of data that we've just thrown in here to kind of show it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drill down to a particular machine to kind of see what we can get. So first, this machine is showing that it's not compliant. So we can drill down and kind of see why. As we expand it here, you can see this is a non-TPM machine because it's actually my VM. You can see, the cipher strength was 128. So, that's what my policy encrypted it at. Shows all the policies that are applying to my my data drive, et cetera. And down here you can see that I have actually 3 different drives on this machine. I have my operating system drive, and I have 2 fixed data drives. So we'll talk about fixed data drives in a minute, but essentially this is like multiple partitions that I had on my machine. And so I can see that each one of those is encrypted and what the protector is. So it could have been that it was TPM plus PIN, but since this is a non-TPM machine, I can't use TPM. I can only use a password protector to protect that. And you can see just kind of how that looks. So that's kind of how the reports look essentially for this. There's also a recovery audit report. So I mentioned this before that if your help desk goes in and actually needs to recover a key for somebody, you want to know who that was and what they were doing it for. So the audit report will actually show you that information. So you can have that auditing. And that's something that if you were just storing your keys to AD, it's not actually going to do any sort of auditing if anybody goes in there and grabs that key. So
yep.
that's...
And even for the self-service portal, we also include that audit there. So even if you're thinking about allowing your end users to do their own thing there and recover their keys, we're still going to log in every time, you know, one of those users recovered those keys.
Exactly. So let's walk through the drive recovery real quick. So this is when a user calls in and they're locked out of their machine for some reason. And this is for Bitlocker only, obviously. All right, let's see if we can... Got these sweet domain names here. All right, so here it's saying the first 8 characters. So when someone goes into recovery mode, there's actually a 32 character recovery key ID. And instead of having to require that, they're usually pretty unique. So we just require the first 8 characters of that. And then you can select the reason. So there's obviously various reasons why someone will call in. They maybe forgot their PIN or their password, or you know, there was an issue with like the BIOS changing, so they changed the boot order or something in their BIOS, and they hadn't suspended BitLocker. So there's various things that can cause it to go into a recovery state. So we'll just say that the boot order changed. Hit submit, and now we've got their recovery key. So you would give this to the end user, they would type it in, and they would get back into their machine, and off they go. You can, yeah. It's that's in the audit report.
So sorry, go ahead.
So the question was, can you report on the reasons? That can provide some valuable data to your organization to say, geez, people are changing their BIOS all the time. Like, we shouldn't be changing our BIOS at all. So, you know, that's something that you can kind of see. So here's the audit report, and it shows that, you know, the operating system boot order changed, and then you can see there was a reset PIN lockout. So, you know, you can kind of do some querying on your own on the back end as well if you want to actually get some good data on why people are calling in and having to recover their keys. There's not. The question was, is there anything on the agent that actually will report on why they were locked out? And it's in a pre-boot stage, so it's hard. The agent can't really do anything, and it's not storing that data anywhere. So yeah, this is just the user calling in and stating that. So there is a chance that, you know, the help desk person puts the wrong the reason down there. They just pick operating system, you know, boot order changed every time or something. So the data is only as accurate as what the help desk person puts in. All right, last thing to show on this one is manage TPM. And as Paul mentioned, if MBAM actually owns your TPM, then we can escrow the TPM key. And, you know, there's a chance that like someone's trying to hammer against the TPM, and each manufacturer has a different number of times that they'll allow that hammering to occur before they'll actually lock it out for a certain amount of time. So if you want to get past that, then you can come in here and we'll give you the key. Now the caveat to this is that this key doesn't change, because if you change this key, you're messing up your TPM. So this is like, if they write down this key and this password and use it, then it's not going to change ever. So you have to kind of be a little careful with that. But it's better than being locked out of your machine. So, but again, this is we'll only store it if MBAM owns the TPM. So that's the help desk portal. So what's the experience like for the self-service portal? So when you're setting this up for the first time, this is kind of the default screen that you'll see. So obviously your organization is not called Contoso IT, so you can customize this however you like. And in the notice here, it will actually, you know, tell you where you can change that. So there's a notice in here. You can go customize the page however you'd like. Now you can see here that we're using integrated authentication, because most of you are probably wondering, if it's a self-service portal, how do I protect this? Like, I don't want people going in and putting in, you know, they've taken the CEO's machine and they forced it into recovery mode so they can get past their PIN, and now they just want to get his, you know, get past that so they can get into the machine. So that's where the integrated authentication comes into play. So whenever the MBAM agent actually escrows a key, we also escrow the end user that was logged into that machine. And that's how we can kind of link up a user to a machine, because if you're able to log in the machine, we assume you're a valid user of that machine. So when they come to the self-service portal, that's how they'll be able to get that. So we'll walk through and just kind of show what that scenario looks like. Let me pull up.
And why you type that, Lance? That's an important distinction. That's the security feature of the self-service portal. Because if you remember, the help desk portal, that user can basically recover the key for any user. For your self-service portal, we have this mechanism to tie volumes to end users. So if I log to the SSP and try to recover your key, I won't be able to. Otherwise, I could just walk by your computer, enter that key, and get access to that computer. So it's really tied to the user who was logged into that machine when, before the recovery happened. Yes? That's right. So the question was, how do you log in, right? Your machine is locked up. How do you get to the SSP in the first place? So you do have to go to another machine. You could even try to use your phone. We don't officially support it, but the web page would just load, and it's a very simple web page. So you have to go to another machine, and you have to be logged into the machine. And that's how we tied. The end user who's logged into that second machine has to be the same user who was logged into that original machine that got locked up.
Exactly. So here you can see I entered the first 8 digits. Behind the scenes, it validated that corp administrator was valid for that machine that the recovery key belongs to, and then it pulled up my recovery key here. So again, this is the same process. It's a single-use recovery key. So the minute that I'm able to get into my machine and the MBAM agent wakes up, it's going to create a new recovery key and re-escrow that to MBAM, so that whether I've written it down or not, because obviously I can't memorize that anyway, that key is no longer valid. So just to show what it looks like if I'm not a valid user of that machine. I got another recovery key here, and you can see the requested key is not valid for that user. That's because I'm logged in as corp administrator, and I've never logged into whatever machine this key is associated with. So that's kind of where that comes into play. So that kind of walks through the recovery scenarios that we have here, and kind of with the 2 portals. So I'm going to take a minute and walk through the CM integrated installation and kind of walk through what those components are. But I won't do a full install. A lot of it is exactly the same, so we're not going to spend a lot of time going through each of the steps. But I do want to show the difference, the fork in the road, and what the differences are there. And then we'll show kind of what the final result is on CM and what it actually installs. Uh-huh. We don't store that historical data. The question was, do we plan to have anything in our reports that show when it was originally encrypted? And we just show the last encryption time, which is usually probably the most valid because that's when it actually reported in that it was encrypted. So whether or not that happened 4 years ago was the original time or today, they still have that. Someone has that machine on your domain and it was able to check in. So I don't know if there's maybe a lot of value in storing the original time since you'll have the last time. Okay.
Yeah, there's always different aspects. I think the main scenario we're targeting there is really something happens to that computer, and we need to know if the last time that computer talked to the servers, if it was encrypted.
Right. Okay, so we've launched the setup again, and here we're at the fork in the road. So for this scenario, we're going to do System Center Configuration Manager. I already have that running on this machine. And here when I click that, you're going to see there's a message here that states that you need to make some MOF file changes. So we have 2 MOF files that need to be, we need to edit the configuration.mof and the smsdef.mof to add a couple of custom WMI classes that we use to allow the config manager agent to actually report on compliance. So that's what, you can do that before, you can do it after. Here it says do it before, but honestly you can do it after. It doesn't really matter. You can walk through the installation, but just realize if you don't add it, then at all, then you're obviously not going to be able to get that compliance data. So just make sure you do it. And then the link will show you exactly what those steps are that you would copy and paste into your SMSDef MOF and the configuration MOF. It does, correct. Yep. So it'll add a WMI class on the client and populate that. Oh, the details are on our documentation, online documentation. So if you just click the link here, I don't have internet access here, but if you click it, then it'll pull it up. So. All right, so I'm just going to show the differences here, but I'm not going to walk through the whole install. So here you're going to see that we have System Center Configuration Manager integration. So that's one of the main differences here. You're still going to have separate boxes for the recovery information because we don't store that in Configuration Manager, as Paul mentioned. So we still recommend that you'd, in a real production environment, that you'd have 3 different servers. So you'd have the web server and the SQL server that just support the standalone components we need for like the recovery database, the help desk portal, and those sorts of things. But then you have your normal configuration manager environment, which the only changes there outside of running the installation is the MOF files. So we'd still recommend doing that. So that's pretty much the only differences here. So you can see here it's now called the audit database. It's not the compliance and audit database, and that's because the compliance information is now stored in Configuration Manager. But everything else is pretty much the same. So those are pretty much the only 2 differences. And then the reporting, you'll notice, is only for audit reports. So in the standalone portal that we just showed, you're only going to see audit reports. You're not going to see any of those compliance reports because all of those get installed into your Configuration Manager environment through that first checkbox. So those are kind of the main differences. And now we're going to jump ahead and just kind of walk through the components real quick of what it looks like on Configuration Manager once it's already installed.
So Lance, the only change that we don't automatically do is the MOF files, right?
Correct. Yep.
Once you select that box and point to your CM server through the install, we're going to save the baselines, create the collections, do everything for you. The only thing that we don't do is the MOF file change that we need to do manually.
Absolutely. Yep. So just check the documentation on that. And again, you can do it before or after, but just realize no compliance data in your CM environment until you've updated your MOFs. All right, so now we have an environment where we've got it integrated. You'll see if you go under reporting, so if you go into the monitoring node, you go under reporting, reports, there's now an MBAM folder. So under the MBAM folder, we have 4 reports. So we've got computer compliance, which again is if you just put a single machine in, it will show the compliance for that particular machine. We've got a dashboard, which is a little more robust than the standalone version. And we have a couple other enterprise reports here. Due to time, I'm not going to walk through all of those, but I'll just try and show this one at least. So again, the benefit of having this integrated with your CM environment is not only scalability, but now you kind of have that single pane of glass for that client management. And so you can see all those reports in here and just manage the compliance piece through that, the config manager agent. So here, again, you can kind of get the graph here of the compliance of your organization. You can actually click on these and drill down if you'd like to see which machines are not compliant, for example. And then it will also show, and this is something that's in the config manager reports, the compliance status by drive type. But what that means is that how many of your machines are compliant as far as the operating system drive versus like the fixed data drive. So you might have more fixed data drives in your environment than you realize, and so this can kind of help you to see that you have a lot of machines that maybe you need to look at your FDD policies and make sure that people are being covered. The other thing that we do, and Paul mentioned this before as well, is that under device collections, we'll actually create this MBAM supported computers collection. And it has a query on there that will essentially pull back all the machines in your organization that are essentially MBAM compatible. So it'll pull back like Windows 7 machines that have TPM greater than 1.2, and it'll pull back Windows 8 machines regardless of whether or not it has TPM. So what you can do with this is we'll deploy our configuration baselines that I'll show in a minute to this particular collection. Or in your environment, it probably makes more sense to just use this as a starting point and essentially like look at the query that we've created and then kind of filter it down so that you can manage like the client deployment, for example, in kind of a more controlled fashion. So you might have add a few machines at a time or create multiple query-based collections that you deploy to just over the course of a couple of weeks or however you normally do your software distribution. So just kind of consider this more as a starting point as opposed to like the end-all for deploying MBAM. The last thing is under compliance settings, we actually create 2 configuration items. One is for the compliance of your fixed data drives, and one is for your operating system drive protection. And we add both of those to a baseline called Bitlocker protection. And then the Bitlocker protection one is what's currently deployed to the MBAM supported computers. So it'll start reporting in compliance, assuming you have your MOF file changes and you've deployed the MBAM agent to those machines as well. And that's pretty much how the configuration manager integration looks. The last thing that I want to show to get this set up is on the domain controllers. I'm going to go over this fairly quickly. You can definitely look into it on your own. So what we've done is when you deploy those policy templates that we talked about, the ADMX templates, we essentially create like a subset of the normal Bitlocker policies that you'll see. And so we recommend that you don't kind of mix and match. You don't really want to have like Bitlocker policies and MBAM policies because they can cause some conflicts based on the order that they apply. So when you're using MBAM to control Bitlocker, we highly recommend that you actually just set all of your group policies here. So if you deployed the MBAM agent to all of your machines, but you don't have any group policies in place, then nothing is going to happen because it doesn't know where to escrow the keys or what to do. So you've got to set stuff here so that it'll actually do it. So you can choose your cipher strength here. You can go under client management and configure the MBAM services. And this is a really critical piece here. So you'll have endpoints that get created on the servers that you installed the admin and monitoring web services to. So you need to fill in that information as appropriate. You can see here this is how often that the client checks in and reports. So you can change this to be higher if you don't want it to check in as frequently. Maybe you only want it to be once a day, so you can definitely edit that. And then this is the status reporting point, which is essentially where it reports in its compliance data. So this first one is just how often it checks in, it wakes up and sees if there's anything it needs to do. And then the other one is just how often it actually reports in compliance data in a standalone environment. Now this is a key point here. So if you're doing CM integrated mode, you don't want to have this populated at all. Because what's going to happen is now you're going to have compliance data in two different systems. Because we still install the database in this, when you're in a CM integrated mode that does the compliance, or that has like the tables for the compliance piece. But you want all of that in your config manager environment. So it's not going to break anything if you leave this here, but we highly recommend getting rid of it so that you're just looking at your compliance data in configuration manager.
And one interesting point there, Lance, on the intervals is that the client interval, it's also something you need to consider as far as end user experience. So if end users get that little pop-up saying you need to encrypt the drive and they click postpone, they could click that postpone and just, next time it's going to pop up again. So if you're noticing a lot of people in your environment who are not encrypting their drives or taking a long time, you could decrease that, interval. So we would be bothering those users even more if you wanted to force them to get to a compliant state.
All right, the other piece I just want to talk about quickly and show is on the operating system drive encryption settings. This checkbox is new, and it says allow BitLocker without a compatible TPM. So if you check this is essentially saying that on Windows 8 and like for Windows to go devices, for example, that BitLocker can actually be enabled with a password protector if you'd like on a non-TPM device. So if MBAM actually detects that there is a TPM, then it'll ignore this and just use TPM only or TPM plus PIN. So it just depends on what you set there. But if we don't detect a TPM is present on that machine, like for a Windows to go device, for example, then we'll only allow a password protector. And then you'd set up the password protector piece here. So you can set if you want to allow password complexity or not, and there's some information here on how that works. So that's just kind of a critical piece. So once you have the GPO set up, you deployed the agent, you've installed all the server components, then MBAM will function. So we'll turn that back over to Paul.
Awesome. And there's a lot of details. I mean, we could easily spend another half an hour just talking about policies. There's a lot of complexities there when you set up one or the other and how they combine together. So there's definitely some reading material there for you guys to follow up. Yes? Uh-huh. So the question was around group policies and how they're different between BIOS and UEFI. I don't know any details about that. We can probably follow up with you afterwards because I don't think we have that out of top of our heads here, but we can follow up with you after the presentation. Thank you. All right, so Lance showed the options. He went through the installation of the standalone and CM mode, and that's basically assuming that you're going on a greenfield. If you were going from MBAM 1.0 to 2.0, you basically have a couple of things to consider there. We support all versions of 1.0 that are out there, the original RTM. We had the first R1, which included the localization languages, and we also had a hotfix. So as long as you're running those versions, you'll be able to upgrade to 2.0. However, if you're going from standalone to standalone, it's going to be super easy. I think Lance mentioned that. The only thing you need to do there is really you uninstall MBAM 1.0. The data is left behind on the databases. So once you're going through the setup, you just point to those same databases, and you keep that data there. And the data that you really need to worry about is compliance. The recovery keys will be escrow every time your agent talks back to the server, but compliance is important because you got to think about scenarios like, my laptop's connected right now, it's talking to the server, I go on vacation. If the upgrade happens during my vacation and something happens to my computer, that computer will never have talked to the new server. So security team will like to go to the previous database and see, well, was that computer encrypted or not? So keeping that compliance data, the backup, whatever the history data in place when you upgrade is important. The recovery keys will be regenerated. The one complication you get is if you're going from MBAM 1.0, which is always standalone, we didn't have a CM mode then, and you're going to the CM mode now in 2.0. So remember I just talked about the important piece is the compliance data. If you're going to CM mode, the compliance data will start being saved to CM. So the database will still be there. You want to install 1.0, the compliance data will still be there, but once the 2.0 server starts to function, the new compliance data will be stored in CM. So if you do run into a in a scenario where you need to check compliance data for, computers that were talking to the 1.0 infrastructure, you have to manually go to that database that was left behind and look at that data. So that's the one inconvenient part of that process. And this is just talking about the order here. How do you do your upgrade? Basically, you should always start with the server. So you do the process we just talked about. You want to install your 1.0 server, create the 2.0 servers. A lot of people, though, do change hardware when they're doing that kind of upgrade. So you could keep your 1 servers running, and then you install your 2.0 servers, you migrate the data if you want. You can keep that data behind if you're comfortable with that option. And then you deploy the agent. So you deploy the new agent, and it's going to be using the old policy. So you just need to be aware that there's some differences in policies from 1.0 to 2.0, and that's really the only way to know the subtle differences is going through documentation. There are things about, protector enforcement. We're more flexible in 2.0, so we allow you to set things like, well, I want to enforce auto-unlock, but I want to allow my users to add a password to their fixed data drives if they want to. Some of those scenarios were not supported in 1.0. So you just need to keep those in mind. After you update the agent, you go ahead and deploy the new policy. So after those 3 pieces are in place, then you have the full 2.0 functionality in place.
So Paul, what happens to my 1.0 clients after I upgraded to MBAM 2.0?
So they will still talk to the 2.0 server. That's why we say start with the server, because the 1.0 clients will still be able to talk to the 2.0 server. The reason you want to update the agents and then the policy is because we have new functionality in 2.0. And if you're still running 1.0 agents, they won't know what to do there. So it's gonna be in that mixed mode. It's gonna be still using the 1.0 logic for the policies. We just talked about that, the key recovery during upgrade. Something else to keep in mind is the availability of the websites. So if you were using 1.0, the only website you had was the help desk portal. Regardless of that, while you're going through the upgrade, you need to make sure you have a website pointing to the database so keys can be recovered. Otherwise, people will get their computer locked up, we'll call help desk, and help desk will say, well, there's nothing I can do. So you have to plan around that. That's why updating the servers first is also the best place to start. We talked about the compliance information and how that it's complicated if you're going from standalone to CM mode. And then the last point is about the new functionality. Not only be aware of the differences in policy when you're doing the upgrade, also be aware that end users will have a different experience. I think Lance is going to show how the end user experience looks like. It's a lot better in 2.0, but at the same time, you might get new pop-ups. Users might start, being prompted to encrypt drives they were not being prompted before. So just have that, send an email, have documentation available to end users so they understand how the new process will look like. Lance, do you want to go over the MDT deployment steps?
Yeah. So just briefly, like when you're deploying this through MDT, there's a few things that kind of need to happen. So this is doing it during MDT is obviously during your imaging process. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that you've enabled TPM in the BIOS. That's important. So for this scenario, we're essentially just focused on the pre-provisioning, and the pre-provisioning is really awesome during imaging because how many of you guys have had to wait 5, 6 hours, 7 hours for your hard drive to get encrypted with Bitlocker or any other third party? That's a long time, right? So with pre-provisioning, what happens is you have a bare metal machine that doesn't have any data on it whatsoever, and there's a step in here called Enable Bitlocker Offline. And what happens during that is that at the very beginning of your task sequence when you're in WinPE, it essentially will enable BitLocker on your machine. The cool part about that is that it's using use disk space encryption, and the use disk space on your bare metal machine is 0. So you're instantly encrypted. So as you're adding data to the machine, as the operating system is deploying and your applications are deploying, you're encrypted right out of the gate. So you could essentially hand that to an end user, and they would be protected out of the box on a clean machine. So that's pretty cool. So MBAM actually plays a pretty key role in that because what happens is when you do pre-provisioning, your machine is actually in a kind of a non-active, or BitLocker actually is in a non-activated state. So if you go into the BitLocker control panel applet, for example, it's going to say like awaiting app activation. And so what happens is when you install the MBAM agent during your operating system deployment process, we'll actually understand that you're in this awaiting for activation state, and we'll turn on the protector so that you're ready to go. So pretty cool how MBAM can kind of help out with that process. So again, just high-level steps here. You can see that you enable TPM in the BIOS, you enable the BitLocker offline to do your pre-provisioning, install the operating system, you're being encrypted on the fly, and then you join the domain and install the MBAM agent, and then you can run this key here, these reg keys, to actually get MBAM to enable the protectors for BitLocker in that pre-provision state. And the no startup delay key, we can talk about that later, but essentially what it does is it makes it so that the MBAM agent wakes up immediately instead of waiting that 90-minute delay. So after you've installed the MBAM agent, we'll escrow the key, we'll make sure you have TPM if it is a TPM machine, and in the end you just kind of remove the keys that you used during provisioning, and the GPO will apply, and then if you've set TPM plus PIN, for example, it will prompt the end user to enter a PIN once you've delivered that machine to them. And we'll walk through what the client experience for entering that PIN looks like in a minute.
And that it's really cool that we can have MBAM integrated in that process. Even if we were not there and you were just doing the BitLocker pre-provisioning, MBAM would still be able to be integrated afterwards.
That's correct.
So we would actually see if you had, at the end of the day, if you have BitLocker in that state that says we're just waiting to be activated, actually the MBAM agent would look at that and say, hey, okay, let me activate this and enforce the protectors that my policy is telling me to.
So if you guys are struggling to sell, MBAM or a BitLocker to your security people, I know sometimes there's a fight back and forth, but having that pre-provisioning where you're encrypted out of the box is pretty awesome. It's a pretty cool selling point.
Yep.
No, you can actually do it for Windows 7 too, but it requires the ADK. So with Windows 7 previously, it used the Windows AIK, but if you can use the ADK with like MDT 2012 or with Config Manager 2012 SP1, then you can do pre-provisioning on Windows 7 as well. Correct. Yep. So it'll encrypt offline and then encrypt as you go.
So it works for Windows 7. And
but you do
Windows
need to make sure that it will not work through Config Manager 2007 if you're still doing OSD through that. It has to be Config Manager 2012 SP1. So Or if you're just doing light touch deployments, then you can do it with MDT 2012. So it has to support the ADK.
All right, and then talking about the existing OS.
Yeah, existing OS is kind of the same deal. So we won't really walk through this one, but bottom line is if you already have Bitlocker deployed, you can follow these steps, and you can review this in the slide deck afterwards on how you can actually deploy MBAM and have it escrow keys for existing machines that may or may not have Bitlocker enabled. So,
awesome. All right. So talking about the client-side changes, we talked a lot about the experience for IT admins and the server roles and everything that we do for the IT admin. But for the end user, we also did some pretty interesting updates there. The first one is the compliance calculation. One of the feedback that we got for 1.0 was that we were too rigid when we were trying to calculate compliance. So the reports that Lance showed you where we say, 50% of your company is compliant and 25% is not, it doesn't really mean if the drives are encrypted. It means if the drives are encrypted and following the policy settings that you have there. So if your policy is everybody should have TPM plus PIN as my OS protector. If my computer is encrypted with TPM, I'm going to show as non-compliant, which in this situation is fine. But what we did for 2.0 is kind of like the other way around. So if my policy is TPM, but I'm an admin user, and I went to the Bitlocker control panel, and I just say, hey, I want to add a PIN. In 1.0, we would report that computer as non-compliant because it was different than the policy. Now, what we have in 2.0 is the concept of minimum security. So if I'm adding on top of what the policy is, I'm still going to be reported as compliant. And that applies for OS drives and fixed data drives as well. So for fixed data drives, if auto-unlock, for instance, is your policy and you go ahead and add a password, you're still going to be considered compliant. The encryption flow, hopefully we'll be able to show you some of that. The time is kind of running out. So basically, we're a lot more clear on the messages we give to the end user. We make a distinction between your computer needs to be encrypted, and now we say drive C needs to be encrypted, or policy for drive D has changed, you need to add a password. So we're just trying to minimize a little bit of the surprise factor there when end users get that pop-up and they're like, oh my goodness, what's happening? I'm being hacked or something. So we're trying to minimize that problem. And then last, for Windows 8 non-TPM machines, we mentioned that before, we support Windows to Go. The only protector supported there is the password protector. And along with Windows to Go, we support non-TPM machines. So the important thing to note there is if the machine has TPM, it will look at the TPM protector policy. If it doesn't have TPM, then if you allow that checkbox to be checked there and say, yeah, I want to enforce passwords, that's when we allow passwords on the OS drive. All right, second demo. Oops. There you go.
All right, so on this machine, we're going to kind of walk through what the client experience looks like. So, most people are like, okay, well, I want to be able to add MBAM and encrypt my machine before I give it to the end user during imaging, but I really want them to be able to set a PIN or a password after that. So how do I do that? I don't want my IT folks to have to sit there and force them to actually do it. So how can I make that happen? And this is where MBAM can come in and help out with that. So on this machine, just for the sake of demo, I actually have 3 drives. I have my operating system drive, and I have 2 fixed disk drives. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to decrypt one of these and kind of just show what the process is. Oops, let me find it here. So this could also be a scenario where you have an admin, right? They have access to turn off Bitlocker on your own, and we don't really want them to, or we want to try and get them back to a good state. All right, so I'm decrypted now, so you can see it's just a normal drive. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait a minute, and you can see I decrypted it, and what happened, I instantly had this pop up. Now, granted, it might not be instantly for your end user because I've kind of tweaked this a little bit to make it go faster, but this is the experience that they'll get when they go out of compliance. So what you can do here is it says you need to encrypt your F drive, your fixed disk drive. They can still postpone indefinitely at this point, yep. But what's interesting is internally here at Microsoft, we've had some people that are just angry because they're not encrypting, and they keep hitting postpone, but they keep getting prompted, and like prompted during presentations and things like that. So in the end, you can have your own policies as well internally that will, you can send them emails or do whatever.
And something we didn't have a chance to talk about is the whole exemption process. So we really don't want users just to click on postpone. If they're doing that, they probably have a reason. And we have the exemption process exactly to deal with that scenario. And you can manage that and you customize it. So there's more to be said about that whole flow there.
Yep.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. That's a very common request. So the question was, is there a policy to control how many times or how much time you can just click on postpone? And that's something we're working on, still not there.
Yeah, so as you can see here, I'm prompted. My group policies for fixed disk drives are requiring me to set a password here. So I went out of compliance. I got prompted by MBAM to encrypt my drive, and now I have to create a password. And so once I do this, then it will encrypt the drive, and off I go. So that's a similar end user experience for your end user. So if you image your box and you send that, you give them the machine and you have the MBAM agent on it. When the group policies apply and say you need TPM plus PIN, now they're going to get a prompt that comes up when the MBAM agent wakes up and will prompt them to create that PIN and do it all for them.
And then the last point I want to mention is Lance was opening the Bitlocker control panel. So we still have the Bitlocker control panel and the MBAM control panel. You can disable the Bitlocker one. You can just keep the MBAM control panel there. The reason we have those two is because, especially if you're using Windows 7 and you're not an admin on that box, you'll likely have to use the MBAM control panel to do things like reset your password. If you're using Windows 8, maybe you just want to use the Bitlocker one. There's some flexibility there as far as what you want to enable, what you want to disable. And then the final part is removable disk drives. It's all managed through Bitlocker. They enforce Bitlocker to go is the way to enforce encryption there. We try to escrow those keys. If you're logged into your domain and the MBAM agent's running, Bitlocker will encrypt those drives and will escrow those keys. But that's not guaranteed because you could be, basically logged out of your domain, encrypt an RDD, remove that drive, go back to your domain, and we'll never know about it. So you will see some policies on the MBAM node to control that, but it's really, we just let Bitlocker control the removable drives. All right, so I think we got to the end, and I think we have one more thing to mention, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm getting really tired of showing that April slide for when MBAM 2.0 is going to be released. Do you think there's anything else we could maybe tell these guys?
We got our marketing guy here. Is he giving us the go-ahead? All right. So actually, the good news is if you guys are MDOP, subscribers, you can get MBAM 2.0 right now. We're releasing it today along with everything else that's going on MDOP's transform. All right. So we have a couple of minutes. I think we can open for questions.
If you wouldn't mind going to the mics,
yes.
That would actually really help everyone
that
to hear.
That will help us a lot.
Help us to hear too. So.
Hi. On the compliance, or rather the recovery audit report, you don't actually record the device, the PC name, do you, in 2.0?
Well, if you go to the compliance report, we do. If you go to the audit report, we don't.
So that's what I meant, the audit report, right?
Yeah, the audit report. You will see the user that did the recovery and the user that the key was for, but you don't see the machine name there.
Right. And my last question is, and I can take this offline if other people are not experiencing this issue, but it's what I call false positives, which is where Bitlocker says something has changed, but nothing has really changed. Are there any improvements in those areas to go? They're becoming a rash, basically. So.
Yeah, this is really just TPM and Bitlocker playing together. MBAM is kind of outside of that process. According to the Bitlocker team, as the TPM versions go up, they will be, less, touchy to that kind of thing. But it really depends on the TPM and your hardware manufacturer too.
Right, and with UEFI, there's a lot of improvements there where you should see a lot less of those recovery scenarios.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, with UEFI, there should be a lot less recovery scenarios. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, UEFI helps improve that problem as well.
Yeah, your BIOS machines will be around for a while, right? That doesn't really help me. So
that's true. Yeah, but it's really just the hardware issue. And we know of reports that certain manufacturers have more of that issue, others have less, so it's basically hard.
I'll let the other guys jump in, but I wish I could do encryption of the device without tampering protection, because the tampering protection is less than optimal.
I guess we can follow up on that one. Thank you.
Just real quick before we take the next question, there's the surveys that we handed out at the beginning. If you wouldn't mind handing those in the back to the nice gentleman with the beard in the middle there. He probably won't let you out if he sees a paper in your hand anyway until you give it to him. So just make sure you hand that to him. And if you'd like to fill out a survey but didn't get one because you came in a few minutes late, this is just an MDOT survey to try and help us to make sure we're meeting your needs and make the MDOT products better. So make sure you grab one from that same gentleman.
Two questions.
Sure.
First off, what level of Active Directory is required for this product?
What level of Active Directory? Just 2008.
2008, yeah.
2008?
Yeah.
Okay. Second question is, if you have to implement in 2007, is there any recommendations for migrating from SCCM 2007 to 2012 once this has been installed on 2007?
I mean, it's a similar process where the compliance data should stay in that database when the upgrade happens from 2007 to 2012. So if you had it installed in 2007 and the Configuration Manager agent was getting inventory and sending that to Config Manager 2007, when you do your upgrade, it should be there. And if it's not, then it'll just over time it'll get back in there anyway. So.
Yeah. And
but if you have to do a parallel implementation.
Yeah, I mean, for a parallel upgrade, you're going to have to get, you'd probably want to keep your old database just somewhere so that you can at least have that compliance data, because it's going to take a little bit of time for the new data to get into the new system.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then the one point we didn't mention is, if you want to deal with Windows 8, Windows to Go devices, use CM12, 2012, because CM7 doesn't support those devices.
For smaller sites, like under 5,000 users, is the requirement to have a dedicated IIS for this? Can it be on another IIS server that has those services, or are there security issues with that?
I could definitely.
There shouldn't be any security issues. It totally depends on your environment. I can't say there's no security issues. Sometimes you'll have a box that's hardened. Sometimes there's different configurations that you set at the server level that definitely could impact our websites. So it totally depends. You could test it out though and see if it works for you, and if not, you may have to just tweak some of those security settings to get it to work. But generally, yeah, you should be able to use an existing IIS server if you have one.
As far as the load is concerned, it's really small, so it should be okay.
Right. Yeah, it's more a security issue than a load issue.
Exactly.
We'll go this one.
Okay.
You're up.
Sorry. We're
Striped
pointing
shirt.
to different people.
As far as the recovery keys go in the database, is that data ever purged? Like if a computer gets removed from ConfigMan, or if a computer gets removed from Active Directory, does that information remain in the recovery database for the keys?
So for standalone, the answer is no. We don't have a cleanup for standalone database. For CM, it's configurable. So you basically have a policy in CM of how long you keep data around. We follow that same policy. We don't have a separate setting that you can define there. So that's actually something you need to think about when you're deploying in CM mode. If you want to keep that history data for longer than you're actually keeping the rest of your CM data, you might have to figure out a different strategy there.
Thank you.
No problem. Should we go to that side there?
Yeah.
In a TPM-only scenario, is there any way to enforce the encryption without asking the user, without popping up the user?
No. So currently, the way that we do it is we always pop up that dialog that allows the user to say either start or postpone or request an extension. Okay. You could script around it, but as far as MBAM is concerned, out of the box, you always go through that experience.
Okay, thank you.
If I remember in the talk, you said that from a BitLocker policy perspective, we should use the MBAM GPOs rather than the BitLocker native GPOs, except that that's a significant problem from a security audit perspective, because my security auditors think MBAM is something that I made up, but the default GPO from Windows is real because it came from Windows. Is it possible for us to configure the agent through the MBAM GPOs and leave our existing GPOs around BitLocker configuration so that we can pass our audits? Well,
it's possible. At the end of the day, when you set up MBAM group policy, you are going to the same place that Bitlocker group policy is going. So it's the same policy. There's one node there that Lance showed, the client management one, where you have the point to this server, configure this interval. That's all MBAM. So you have to do that.
Right.
What we are trying to avoid when we say use the MBAM policy is if you go, because we point to the same place, you could have conflicts. So if you go to Bitlocker and say, yeah, I want to allow TPM, and then you go to MBAM and say, oh, I want to have TPM plus PIN, then you might have confusion there and you might have unexpected behavior. So as long as you keep things in sync, you should be fine.
Or separate.
Yeah.
Right, so just do the client piece in MBAM and leave the BitLocker stuff completely in the OS.
It's not what we recommend, but I can tell you at the end of the day, they're going to set the same thing, so it should work.
Hey,
Okay, thank you.
guys, we're about 6 minutes over, and there's going to be another session coming in a minute, but we're happy to stick around and answer any questions that you have. I think we might need to move maybe into the hall just so the other session can start getting set up, but we definitely want to answer all your questions, so hold on to those for just a minute, and then we'll be outside and take those, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.